All right, here we go. Welcome. We'll just cut right to it. It's playoff time, baby. We're going to talk about playoffs. Does that excite you, sir? I mean, it should. You
It's
get a
nice to
bye.
be third year in a row for me. It feels great. It's a really nice turnaround for the franchise.
Yeah, so you're pretty much the opposite of the Chargers right now. As we got Thursday night football going on, it's 13-0. We've got two backup quarterbacks. You're basically having the opposite of the Chargers experience, which is fantastic as a Jets fan that you get to make the
But
playoffs 3 years in a row.
it's
Have the Jets ever done that?
oh, maybe. No, probably not. I would say maybe in the I can't think because it was every 2 years in the early 2000s. It was like every other season or every third season. I know I don't think they ever would have done that. No, they must not have.
You don't think so?
However,
Even with the Rex
like
Ryan
the
toes?
Chargers, like the Chargers, I'm down a starting quarterback. That's been a big thing for me to focus on this week.
Yeah, what are you going to do? I mean, you
Well,
don't have a matchup this week, so you're pretty good, right?
I got very lucky. I picked up Stafford and I picked up Browning, and now I'm just going to wait and see who performs this week. But the matchups between them going into the last 2 weeks of playoffs are not looking pretty for me.
That's the hard part, right? I think you get to the playoffs, and especially if you have a bye, you have to start thinking, okay, two games. What are those
Yeah.
matchups? Start sit decisions, defensive matchups, kicker, quarterback, all those types of things. Um, yeah, that's certainly an interesting conundrum. We've seen so many backup quarterbacks. Browning's looked good for 2 weeks.
Yep.
I've got him in another league. That's certainly an enticing pickup because you have to think they're going to throw. He's produced. He's played really well, but
And
Minnesota sneaky
offensively,
tough matchup.
but offensively, he steps into a better situation, I think, than
Hmm.
Flacco does. I do like Stafford, but I just feel like the wheels are going to come off the train there pretty sometime soon. So we'll see what happens. I'm keeping an eye on it, and I'm just hoping that my quarterback won't be the difference maker in my matchup next week.
Well, I mean, we can jump right into it. Speaking of matchups, do you have a preference? Do
About who?
you?
Let me open up the. I got to. So
Yeah, here we
I
go.
think I'd be playing the winner of Lamagna and Manny, right? Yeah. Oh no. I'm the other matchup.
No, 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 no.
I'm
There is
Richmond.
no reseeding. You don't get to pick your matchup. You don't get to pick your poison. No, no, no. It makes it all the more interesting.
So I got. I mean, listen, I'd love to play Joe. I think the injuries just hamper that team, and it makes me very unafraid of it. Um, I think we got to give credit where credit is due to Paul for not just making the playoffs, but winning that division, though. This is a team that we looked at, and I did the numbers on it today. Through 3 weeks, was averaging less than 81 points a game, and then goes
Wow.
on less than 81 points a game, and goes on to finish the season as the fourth highest scoring team, averaging just about 109 points a week. And wins, he won what? I think 4 weeks in the process. So, we're sitting
Let's
there on the
see.
week pod, but he did it.
Yeah, he almost. I mean, 4 weeks is the top score, probably the most of any team. I
Yeah,
haven't done the tally, but
I think I had three, and Justin probably had two or three also.
Justin definitely had a couple, and I'm sure you did as well. I mean, we'll just do a quick little run through. I mean,
I think three.
you had three, and you had a couple of seconds,
Mm.
so you were close a couple of times. And Justin, he had four as well, plus a couple of seconds, a couple of thirds. So, yeah, I mean, really, you're correct. That's a great turnaround from Paul. I mean, he interestingly sort of went. I mean, he's always all in, I guess, right? It's Paul. He's always trying to be all in. Finished 8-6 though, so you end up being the third highest scoring team, but doesn't rack up the wins like you would expect, right? Or at least the fourth highest scoring team, but still, it's still impressive to do that. I mean, kudos to him, but he's got Joe. That's a tight matchup.
It's 8-6 with that record, but you take out those first three games, he's 8-3 as the third or fourth highest scorer in the league,
Well, no,
which is a
he
much.
went 1-2. He went 1-2 at the first
He
three
went one
weeks.
and
So
two.
he still 7-4. I mean, it's still impressive, right? The turnaround, with being willing to be aggressive, make trades early on, yourself, and he faced a tough schedule. I mean, he faced one of the fourth most points against, which that's something you can't control, right? That's somewhat
Right.
of a fluky statistic, but it does go to show that it makes sense that he's just barely above 500, but it's more impressive when you consider what he did after the first couple of weeks of the year and turning that around. So it's definitely deserves, some flowers. Um, yeah, it was an interesting regular season, right? You had a couple of teams, yourself included, that sort of separated early on, and then it was just a bunch of other mediocre teams kind of fighting each other, slapping each other to see who could maybe make the playoffs, maybe claim I guess a division win. Not that it really matters if you don't get a bye, but you know, it should be interesting. Paul and Joe, third time around. I'm certainly interested to see how that plays itself out here. Joe gets Jefferson back. That's a huge one. That's a huge component to that. If Nick Mullins is capable, maybe that's the difference.
Absolutely. I think that's going to be it's a tough situation. He comes back again. Is he going to leave halfway through the game? Is he going to get a tackle the wrong way? That's going to be an issue. Stroud is in the concussion protocol right now, right?
He is, and I think it's Purdy is the only one. Wow, this one I should have bet Raiders alt line. Raiders to cover was an easy bet. Man, should have gone some crazy alt line.
He just scored. Oh, Jesus. Wow.
Yeah, defensive touchdown. I think you just sort of nope, offensive touchdown.
Myers,
It's
yeah.
so weird.
Wow.
It's so weird watching the Raiders and seeing the quarterback wear number 4, and it not
Yeah.
being Derek Carr. Like that's just strange.
I'm really kicking
Yeah,
myself for being Aiden O'Connell this week in my other league, but I don't blame myself. That was the right
you
choice.
can't. You can't.
No.
I mean, the last time these teams played, Khalil Mack had 6 sacks.
Yeah.
You,
Yeah.
you can't reasonably convince yourself. Yeah, the Raiders, who put up basically didn't score last week, are going to go home on short rest and just light up the Chargers. I mean, the Chargers are
Just
bad. Don't get me wrong, but this is pretty ridiculous in the first quarter. So first 12 minutes of the game or so. But look, let's break down matchups. Paul, Joe, you're right. CJ Stroud is still in the protocol. I think Purdy's the only quarterback this year who's come back same week from a concussion, but he's got Kyler Murray, so I mean, I guess he has protection there.
hasn't, but against
Beyond
the
that,
defense will be tough.
yeah, I think for Joe, the problem he has right now is he has Devontae Adams, and if the Raiders are up big, how much Devontae Adams do we really see in the second half? That
Yeah.
would be concerning right now. On the other side, you've got Eckler, who, I mean, he has been the biggest disappointment
Of the
of the
season by
year.
far.
I mean, I have him in another league, and I have Herbert, and it's just, I'm 6-8, and I made the playoffs. I don't know how, but you know, it's brutal. You can't bench Eckler, but
No.
you cannot depend on him, and so Paul's dealing with that right now. I think this is just an interesting matchup. You look
I,
at
I
it,
think
right?
I think Paul will run away with this ultimately. I
Yes.
just think the matchups are better, the lineup is more solid, the floor is higher. But Paul does have those players, especially Eckler, like you just pointed out this season. And it depends what happens with this game right now. And then Kupp and Najee Harris, who are these two guys who could, yeah, they could go off and give you 20 points in a week. They could also give you 2 points the way they've played this season. So there's a big possible range of outcomes, but I
Mhm.
think Paul definitely has the upper hand here.
Well, Paul should win. He should be favored, no doubt. Cup has been bad for a while. I don't really get it. The whole Najee Harris experience, I have divorced myself from that a long time ago. There's no reason to torture yourself with that. But it's fantasy football, right? It's you see a child plays and all of a sudden, it's lighting it up, or you have a situation where Jefferson goes off or Pickens. I mean, Joe has more boom bust potential. Paul's
Mhm.
got the higher floor and probably a higher ceiling as well. When you think about Diggs, Allen, the Cowboys secondary plays very aggressive, gives up a lot of big plays, but also forces a lot of takeaways. So you probably expect some takeaways against Allen, but Diggs and Allen probably both produce well because of the nature of that game. Plus, it's in Buffalo. Yeah, it should be interesting. I'd be curious to see how it all plays out. Obviously, for you, I think it's just interesting. Now we're in the playoffs. You've got teams that have already played a couple of times this year, and just to break down that history, because I think it's always interesting. You know, Joe beat Paul by more than 100 points week 3. And of course, we've talked about that a little bit. And then Paul got the better of Joe a few weeks ago. So they're 1-1.
Right.
Should be a pretty interesting little matchup. On the other side, you squeak past La Magna for the division.
Truly.
Very, very close. He
Week
gets
win.
Manny, you know. I
I
mean, clearly
to me,
you want Manny to
this
win, right?
I definitely want Manny to win. To me, this matchup comes down to I think Miami's playing with a chip on their shoulder this week, and I think they're going to be aggressive. It depends what version of the Jet secondary shows up, and I think that to me is going to determine a lot of the outcome of this game. And I think you've just got some question marks on the Magna side with these matchups because I think they are super fit. I don't like what he's got on the running back side.
Mhm.
So I think that could be a big issue that holds him back. I think he's got the better team, but I think this could be a week where the matchups might impact that quite a bit.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think this could definitely come down to Monday night with AJ Brown for La Magna, Swift for Manny. I could definitely see that being a deciding factor. But I agree, matchups are important. You know, we don't necessarily always think about them early in the season, but they certainly matter now. I agree. LeMagna's got tougher matchups. He's got a lot of weather issues. You know, it's probably going to be wet in Seattle. Buffalo, this time of year is always unpredictable weather. Cleveland, this time of year, unpredictable. You know, a lot of outdoor games. On the other side, Manny's got the Jets in, Tua at home. So
Mm.
it should be wet, but I mean, you never know. You might get a break in the rain. But beyond that, he's got Debo in Arizona, which you would expect a big game. He's got the Ravens going down to Jacksonville. Should be a wet game. Should be weird. You've got Lawrence's injury, and the Jags just not looking great at the moment. I could see there being little differences there. We'll see. It should be really close. I'm definitely interested to see how it comes out. I don't think Manny's team is 8-6 bad, but you've got to put it all together consistently at this time of the year. And Tua, you don't know that offensive line really got banged up last week.
Yep.
I don't know. The Dolphins are hard to figure out. They really don't beat good teams, and they really only dominate the bad teams. It's very strange. It's very feast or famine. There's probably a bunch of reasons for it, but I don't know. I mean, but I guess let's turn away from maybe that and say, as a Jets fan, what are you hoping for? Do you want to run the table, get Aaron Rodgers back, and try to sneak in as a wild card, or is this sort of sit
I,
Rodgers?
I want this franchise to lose every game left in the season 42 to nothing. I want them to have to pay a very deep price to their pride and their ego for what they have subjected us through the Zach Wilson experience. I don't want anyone to feel good about it. I want us to look back on this chapter as the dark ages, which, by the way, go all the way back to probably 1970 for this franchise, but specifically the past few years. I just want, I will not be happy until there is as much as I think Salah gets the short end of the stick in all of this, the house needs to be cleared. We have got to start over. This has been a terrible choice that they have stuck to for way too long. That, in my opinion, if you try to build a win now team, which is what yes, they did that this year, and it's unfortunate that it is an injury. But if you've got every other piece in place that except quarterback, your quarterback goes down in the first week, and it is so clear that this is not the guy who can get you to the promised land you can be in. You've got to be more aggressive on the market through trades or the free agents that are out there to find somebody. To me, there's no excuse for that. You've built a win now team.
But I don't know how much you can put. Like, I don't think you can put injuries at the quarterback position on the head coach. I
No,
think
but I
I think
think
the
the length of time that he has been there is going to lead to. I think the way the media will paint it will be that he's going to end up leaving.
but see, I don't know that that's fair, right? And maybe that's true.
I
Coaches
don't.
usually get the short end of the stick or the shortest end of the stick. I'm not saying Salah should stay or go. I'm not a Jets fan. I don't follow it close enough. Besides what sort of is made national, the fact that he's like buddy buddy with some super fan radio personality who's then out there commenting on what are probably off the record conversations. There's a lot of things that are just sort of maybe first time coach issues, but this isn't year one. You've got to tighten up. But it's part of it is also the GM's responsibility. How are you
Exactly.
constructing your team? You know, and
Yeah.
it's I was listening to, discussion about the Chargers, for example. Is this all Brandon Staley, or is this also the GM only wanting to draft really big receivers who aren't necessarily fast or the best option at those picks, not having appropriate depth at other positions? You know, those are real questions. And I think for the Jets, you've got Garrett Wilson. There's really not a competent number two receiving threat on the roster. There's certainly not a third receiving option on the roster. The Brees Hall injury is what it is. It
But the
takes about a
O-line is
year or
not.
two. The O line is not good. It always have these injuries. The defense is strong, right? You could always improve depth or a piece here or there, but the defense is not really the problem. But it's offensively, and it's hard because now you have the Rodgers money, which is massive. I think Garrett Wilson in a couple years is going to be expensive. Of course, Rodgers is probably gone by then, but these are GM issues. It's
I
how you
agree.
construct the roster. Coaching wise, of course, you're hiring you hired Hackett because of Rodgers, right? You brought in Cobb and Lazard who haven't done anything. Like, okay, I get all of that, but you can't put that on Salah so much as he's dealt a certain hand. And yes, the whole back and forth between Zach Wilson and look, that was terrible. Why didn't you go get a Flacco? Why didn't you go try to trade for someone? Do something. Again, Kirk Cousins could have been traded for
Yeah.
before he got hurt, and would have made a lot of sense just as a rental. But again, these are front office decisions and coaching decisions, and
I agree with you.
it's tough.
I think the Chargers are a great comparison for them. I think with the Jets,
Mhm.
I blame Douglas for this, right? You're right. It's a personnel
Yeah,
management issue. I think best case scenario for me is Douglas goes, they bring in a new GM, but when you have a new GM come in, I think that means Salah gets 1 year. And then if they have some good performance, he'll get to stay around. If not, the GM's going to clean house and bring in his own people. But I think like Telesco,
sure.
Chargers is a great comparison for that. Because it is not Staley's reputation. We're talking as far back as the Schottenheimer years. Like this franchise has this incredible track record in the same way that the Jets, it's really like unlucky almost more than bad decisions, but the Chargers make terrible personnel decisions and they have these great talents. They could really build franchises around time after time after time. But everyone who ends up at the front of that organization has some quirk where they're not making the right choices. And yeah, I don't. I actually like Staley a lot. I think he's a really good. I think he makes bad decisions. I think he sometimes, but I think he takes some of the right risks that a coach needs to take. But I think they are missing the pieces. And to your point, that goes up to the GM side of things.
Yeah, I mean the Chargers is it could be a long conversation. I think it's more than it's not just coach, it's not just GM. I think Herbert has a very high ceiling, but there's a lot of inconsistencies with throughout games as well as over seasons. They are old on the defense. Yeah, Mac is having a good year, but I mean Bosa is hurt. Bosa is always hurt, always
Yeah.
underperforming. The offensive line is never lives up to its potential. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that matter and it's difficult. Roster construction matters, championship windows matter. How are you allocating your money on a consistent basis year over year to maximize your opportunity? And a lot of teams do it poorly, and you're right though. I do think, Staley I think is gone just because the results are just well below what they should be. With Salah, I agree with you. I think it makes more sense to if you do make a change, front office, maybe some coaches, but not him, and he gets one more year. It's very common. You see that in college a lot. The athletic director gets replaced, and then a year later, you see a new basketball coach or a new football coach. They kind of give it a year, give it a time period to evaluate the programs, and then they make a change, which is
Uh,
which is fine, and I think smart from a business perspective. But look, you have to win.
there's on the subject of GM and personnel to bring it back to our lead for a second. I obviously, I like to go around and look up some interesting statistics. Like LaMagna, what are some interesting statistics ahead of today's conversation? And on the topic of player management, I think one thing that is really worthy of note is that if you take defense, which I think it's fair to take defense and kicker out of the conversation, but just to take defense out of it, Justin has only made 3 personnel moves all season. That draft went so well for him. All he has had to do is in September he added Baker Mayfield, and 2 weeks ago he dropped Miller to pick up Logan Thomas. Other than that, the team, other than that and defense, which again, streaming defense is such a reasonable move in this, I don't think it's fair to consider that. His team has not changed shape. From the draft day decisions, that team is where it is because of that and that alone, which I think is very impressive,
It
especially in
is,
the
and
scene too.
yeah, and he deserves a lot of credit. I mean, look, it's I think he deserved rightfully, some pushback last year for not keeping Lamar. He obviously has Lamar this year. Lamar's playing very well, but by having the number one pick, landing McCaffrey,
Mhm.
that's a easy gimme. Traded for Jamar Chase gives you two elite players at that position. Keenan Allen's been fantastic this year. Of course, he's not playing tonight, but has been or I guess he is playing tonight. That was sort of a no, he's not. Sorry, he's out tonight. But of course,
Right.
he's been really strong. It doesn't matter for Justin today, but Mike Evans has had a really strong year. That's very much a player who last year there were reasons to think there was going to be regression back toward his previous production, but maybe not to this level. Done very, very well, catching more deep balls, more touchdowns, avoiding the pass interference and the drops that he had last year. But you're right, this is all draft, or largely draft, and it's worked out. He's also had health. That's a big thing. You can't control health. Um, it's we talked about at the beginning, backup quarterbacks, right? It's if your guys don't get hurt, and Lamar generally has always gotten hurt, but if he doesn't get hurt, that is an elite player at that position. He could always go for 25, 30 or more points. McCaffrey, right? Chase. Even with Browning now, Chase is still performing. Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, these guys who generally have a lot of injuries in and out of seasons, he stayed healthy and it's paid off. Now, look, we're in December. Everybody's got, some kind of little thing they're dealing with. We'll see how it ultimately finishes. But you're right. It's been fantastic to see someone not have to wheel and deal and just sort of let it play out.
Yeah.
And you know, I, I'm not rooting for anyone, but I think it's a nice change for Normally, we see the teams that are all making all these trades that are at that top, and it's nice to see someone who's not having to do that be in that position.
So let's talk about trades. I think tonight's an interesting night to look back on a trade that was discussed on this pod, which was the very, I would say, infamous at this stage Eckler Achane swap, which
Hmm.
very fascinating at the time. And I think you look back on it now, and I think Bodson is a very big winner in that trade. I think Paul tried to paint getting Eckler for this season as a great thing, but we've seen the performance is just not there. I don't think Paul will find his way to the championship game. Maybe maybe just making the playoffs made him feel good. But now Bodson's got this incredible keeper value for him. Great performance coming out of him. Now he might be that might be his ticket to not only getting a first round draft pick as well. That looking back on that trade now, it's like, wow, what you see how a season unfolds and really changes the perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean that was Eckler for Achane straight up. You know, that's a very we don't see that a lot in our league, right? You generally see some sort of pick, one way or another. Everybody's trying to kind of play at the margins, or you see Fab, right? I guess we saw that this year. Someone threw in Fab in a trade, like it made a difference. Um, I still have to be reminded next year because I'm definitely going to forget. But you're right. It's interesting, right? Achane is an eighth round keeper going forward. I think if Bodson does not keep Achane, it's sort of a wash because Eckler's not been very good, and unless Paul wins it all with Eckler doing something, it's kind of a waste. But if Bodson keeps Achane and he's able to stay healthy over the course of a couple of years, that could really pay off. I don't. I mean, I hold my breath for that because he's a smaller back. He does like to go between the tackles, or he's capable of that, but he's not a big guy. He got hurt early in the year. He's got a nagging toe thing now. The other thing about that trade was when it was made, Achane was hurt.
Right.
That was the other part of that. It was essentially almost as if, and Bodson clearly, wanting to, I think, punt on the season a little bit, maybe drop down out of the playoff race. He's taking on an injured player with a lot of potential for a guy who, while disappointing, is
It's
still
still
highly regarded and has to be is a must start, right? So, you know, it's always very interesting, I think, when you look at dynamics and how people are thinking about that. Um,
Yeah.
so I
It
mean,
was
are there other
interesting.
trades? Anything else that stood out about that trade, or any of the others that
Oh,
you
I
think have
looked,
helped define the season?
it's funny. I don't, I looked at all of them, and all of them really feel like, I will say they all felt like very even trades this year. At the time when you looked at Chen Eckler, you're like, okay, this is lopsided. One of these guys is injured. Someone's clearly punting on the season uh, to get something to hold on to for the future. But when you look through the rest of what was out there, there might be a winner and loser, but nothing that's really insanely lopsided, or you feel like somebody got the short end of the stick. I was looking at, I think once we got into the season, that first trade was your trade with I think Bodson for Anthony Richardson and Rashad White in that exchange. And that trade really it ended up being nothing. There's no significant impact that comes of that. I think you moved around a couple of small draft picks maybe, but then the first big trade that comes out after that is my trade with Wagner, where we swapped.
Hmm.
I took Devonta Smith, gave him Christian Kirk in second, and quite frankly, I thought I got swindled at the start of that because Kirk then goes on to put up a couple good games in a row, but Smith does nothing. But now the tables have really turned. I managed to avoid getting into a key stretch of the season and having someone who was probably an WR2 in my situation fall down to injury. I've got Devonta Smith, whose floor has only gone up as the season has progressed, and giving that away for a second round draft pick, pretty fair value. I think maybe a third would
Hmm.
have been nice. I'll give that to him. And you look at what else was out there. I think Paul made a great trade in getting Laporta from you. I think the value exchange was great right there. So I was jealous of him when he did that. I tried to get him from you for a little bit, and it wasn't on the table at that point. And I think a great end of season trade, or not end of season, but right up at the deadline, was LaMagna getting Jalen Hurts. That was the moment when I was like, oh, I might not actually win the division. That was when I got scared as an owner. I was like, oof, now this team feels
Yeah,
really.
yeah, hurts because Hurts is again, especially with the brotherly shove, right? I mean, has the potential to get 2 touchdowns
Yeah.
rushing on top of whatever else they do throwing the ball. Definitely, I think looking back on some of those transactions, I do think the one that where if Paul doesn't win at all, I do think the Diggs and Allen and 2 5th round picks to give up Garrett Wilson, Brock Purdy, a first and a third. I do think that's probably not a sliding doors moment for Paul, but I do think you look back and go, ooh, if that doesn't pay off, right? If he doesn't make it to the final, maybe that feels a little bit much because he's not going to can't keep both. Um, he has no first rounder, so he can't keep either. And Garrett Wilson has a lot of keeper value left, and Purdy does for that matter as well. He's certainly on the list of potential keepers, in my opinion, given the value. So that one, I look at it as it's still not decided.
Right. Let's do
When it
it.
came down to like trading Laporta and Kincaid and deciding, what to do with McBride, look, I mean, at the deadline, I was having conversations with obviously multiple people for the same players of what's the value going to be here? I mean, it's not elite, it's not first, second round value, but they're different value based on different potentials and different keeper values. And I feel like I got fair value. I do think, it didn't make sense to hold on to 3 tight ends or even really two in the position I was in. And lots of people had needs. And I agree. I think those were good value deals, and they could easily be deciding, have a big say in certain matchups going forward here at the end. The Rashad White deal for Bodson, looking at that, Rashad White's a 3rd round keeper next year. He's the number 5 running back so far this year. I don't know if that's dependable or repeatable. That's going to be an interesting keeper decision for Bodson. You know, I he probably Rashad White probably goes in the 2nd round next year's draft, I would think.
No.
So that's a tough call. If he doesn't keep him, and he obviously Bodson doesn't win the 1st round pick, right? Doesn't win the consolation bracket. I don't know if you look back and go if that trade really mattered. Um, Anthony Richardson obviously got hurt, and look, it was on me for leaving the trade up and everything. But Richardson, even though it doesn't have great keeper value, there's still potential, right? There's still potential top 5 player at that position, guaranteed. So there's also unknowns. I don't think every trade we can look at now and say this is how it, winner or loser. I agree. I think most were even or fairly even, but there's still potential the way the rest of the playoffs play out that we might look back and go, ooh, looking back, Oh, that didn't work out. I guess I'll put it that
I
way.
think what's interesting about our league too is I think the value of draft picks is inflated not just because of assumptions about what I can use them for, but because it's fun to trade draft picks in the same way it's fun to trade fab. So, I think about somebody like you where you've acquired a lot of, you've got a lot of early round picks, you've got a lot of mid round picks as well. You took my eighth for Dalton Kincaid, this fifth for Laporta.
Mhm.
And these are things that give you capital, not just for drafting purposes, but for acquisition purposes into future seasons and making trades. So I love it from that perspective. But on that, what I thought was I forgot about this trade when I was reviewing everything today, which was the Williams Edwards trade between Manny and
Mm,
LaMagna. And what I love about
yeah.
that, LaMagna's clearly got a great team, and he got himself what I think a third round pick in 24 and a third round pick in 25. So he set himself up in a great position for the next two seasons after this, giving him A, capital to make trades with, or B, really good capital to draft with. And I think that
Yeah.
that's one of those trades, that in the same way of my Tyreek Hill trade, will have ramifications for future seasons beyond just the one we're currently in, which is impressive.
Well, I think for LaMagna, you have to remember at the time he did that trade, he had no first, or he has no first and no second next year, and he has no fourth. So he was looking at,
I didn't realize that.
so
Wow.
he has two thirds, two fifths, two sixths. Okay, so he has six picks in the first six rounds. He doesn't have that first or second, and depending on how he finishes in the playoffs, his picks might be toward the end of those rounds. So he needed to do that. He needed to obtain some type of capital somehow. And looking into 2025, he had already traded away his third round pick, so he got one back. So you're right. It's very smart future draft capital management by LaMagna, but it's also, in a way, he had to find somebody, I think, this year to help him recoup, at least for next year, some of those assets, because otherwise,
Yeah, wow.
if you walk into the draft and you're looking at like a third and maybe like two fifths, that's looking pretty bleak. And we know how that plays out in our league, right? We've seen teams, Wagner, myself, teams that are in those positions before, and it's a struggle. So kudos for sure. I agree that trade, you look at it and go like, all right, I mean, Manny wants to give up a bunch of future picks for Kyren Williams, go for it. And it's worked out, right? I think LaMagna could make the deal given the strength of his team, and he got the assets he needed going forward. So that's definitely one of the better ones. I think when you big picture, long term as well. You know, but it's been a fun. It's been a good season. I like I said after the draft, I liked how competitive it appeared from the start in terms of a couple of really good teams, a lot of competitive teams that maybe weren't great, but we're going to make it interesting because no one was really head and shoulders above the rest in terms of a large middle pack, and it played out that way. And I think that makes for an interesting season. You have three teams that are 8-6 in the same division. You've got four teams within a game of each other in the consolation brackets. There's a lot of tight group teams. I think that's going to make the playoffs interesting, and it certainly made the season interesting when you think about seeding and jockeying for position and what do you do juggling between this season for future years. So that's how I like it. I looked at it and I've definitely enjoyed how it's all played out.
And I will tell you, I did look into this. Not the first season that we have had a three-way tie atop a division switch
Mm-hmm.
since switching to the division structure. In 2020, we had a three-way tie between Wagner, Justin, and Paul in the New York City division, which Wagner won, though they were all tied at 6-7 with losing records.
Hey, last year we had three teams at 4-10 in the same division. So,
I saw that. Good thing that
you
it
know,
won.
the better thing about 2020 is we had four divisions instead of three. So you had all of the teams in the same division have the
With this.
same record. That I think is the more like that's the more interesting quirk. And the year before that, you had three teams in the same division separated by one game. So we've seen a lot of parity at times. And that's also part of how we do divisions, right? We've created a structure where going into next year, and I could break it down. I'm not going to do it now, but you take a look at how everyone did, and you put divisions together, and so you naturally group teams that are maybe relatively close in terms of overall talent, especially when you then think of assets and keepers, and that creates a lot of that parity. So I appreciate that because it makes it more interesting than just sort of saying these are your division people forever or drawing a random number out of a hat. it helps keep it, I think, a little bit more interesting and more lifelike, like you would see in the NFL, where the AFC South, everyone's equally terrible, and so they're all grouped together, right? Or the AFC North outside of Baltimore, and then you have divisions like the NFC West or the NFC East, where you have one or two teams just completely blow the rest of the division away, and that's more, I think, what we want as a league is something that approximates what we are watching, play out in terms of the actual NFL.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's been a great
So,
to manage that.
so while we have you here, before we go, you're in the playoffs. You are the number 2 overall seed. You know what your potential matchups are. What do you think happens? What you've, I'm sure, dived into your potential matchups and done your own sort of gaming it out, so to speak. What do you think happens? Who's in the final? Who wins the league now that we're down to 6 out of 12?
I think I got incredibly lucky to win the division. The bye week was huge for me. It gives me time to, did they just score again?
Yeah,
Oh,
defensive touchdown. I know. This is terrible.
I think it gives me a ton of time. It gives me some extra time to get Taylor back, gives me another week, which is great. I don't, they'll probably take their time with him anyway, but that's a big help. I'm terrified. It gives me more time to figure out this quarterback situation because if I didn't have the bye, I would tell you that I was going to lose in the first week. However, I feel pretty good in saying that these matchups are going to be, I think the 1 and 2 seeds are going to make it to the championship game. I just think I think the only other team that is a threat is truly La Magna. And luckily he's up against Justin and not me. So I think the situation does end up being me and Justin in the final. I think that team is just too good. Any given Sunday, anything can happen, but I am down a quarterback. My wide receiver situation can be a little bit boom or bust with Devonta Smith, and then who's ever playing that third spot if I'm not starting Taylor. So I give Justin the edge. I think it's just he's earned it since draft day, and I think it's going to be a playoff coronation for him.
Yeah, I would think so. The interesting thing for Justin is he has the Ravens and the Niners play next week on Monday night, Christmas night. And if I were him, and I don't know who he'll play and if they have any Niners or Bengals, or sorry, Niners or Ravens, but if they don't and he's down, that could be interesting depending on how that is, because you have 2 very, very good defenses, 2 very good offenses. Something has to give. I agree with you. I think Justin should win it all, but I'm thinking ahead. You go to Christmas night next week, he might be sitting there sweating it out, down 10 points or down 20 points or something. Who knows? And needing some real, production from elite players against elite defenses. That to me is, I think, a wild card in this, just because how the schedule works out. I agree. I think Justin gets by, but for you get to avoid La Magna and Justin, right? If you make the final, you only get one of them. You don't have to. Justin has the harder path because of the odds of playing La Magna. Now, if Manny beats La Magna, then of course it doesn't matter. But on paper, he has the harder path. Which, look, champions got to earn it. So we'll see. But I agree. I think Justin is the betting favorite.
Yeah, I think if anything, the confidence, my confidence in this is only impacted by matchups. But to me, the matchups decide 10% of this, right? It's still the player is the key part of this. But I do think I have the better matchups for week 17 when we face each other. I also think it's not just Miami and Baltimore, it's Miami in Baltimore. So who knows what factor weather could end up playing in that game. And also, it's a fact we'll see, what is going on with NFL, the playoff picture at that point, right? Who might be playing a little bit more conservative, who might not be. So I think there's a lot of things that we'll only know once we're through week 16 and we start seeing what that's like. But yeah, it's hard for me to pick against Justin in any situation.
Yeah. Any thoughts on the consolation bracket? I know we've ignored the consolation bracket, so far in our discussion. Not that it makes a big difference unless you win it all and you get that number 1 pick. None of the teams average more than 98 points a week. one team averages only 78, which I just is almost unfathomable how bad that's been. And we've been trying to get that manager on the pod for weeks, and they apparently are squirreled away in black sites across the world, and we can't get them. They won't provide their exact location or you know show their face. So we'll deal with them at a later date. But I don't know if you've got any thoughts on the six of us that are all real disappointing, fighting around for the first round pick, which I think realistically one or two teams don't have a chance, but the rest of us are all about the same. So, and
Yeah,
as I say that, the Raiders go up 4 touchdowns. The total of this game was 36. We are
yeah.
now 26 minutes. Sorry, we are now 21 minutes into the game, and the Raiders have 28 points. They may hit the over by halftime.
Yeah.
Again, Raiders -3 was free money tonight. Clearly should have bet the alt line, whatever the biggest number you could get is, because this is embarrassing.
On the consolation, I'll tell you what, I've liked Bodzen's team all season. I think
Mhm.
it's just very weird how some of these games got muffed. However, him winning is very dependent on Jordan Love's situation. Does he keep performing as Jordan Love, the future of the Green Bay Packers, or is he the Jordan Love of the past couple seasons? I think if he's Jordan Love, the future of the Packers, I think Bodzen could win this consolation.
I think he could. I definitely have the harder route than than Eric, but I agree. I think Botson has the potential because Rashad White's having a great year. Jordan Love isn't. There were a lot of quarterback injuries, but he's been pretty good. Achane could go off at any moment. Kenneth Walker, Amon-Ra St. Brown, DK Metcalf. He's got a lot of the guys that could have huge games and carry him. I don't. Most of the other teams don't. The thing about it is he's got tough matchups this week, right? He's got Denver's defense is playing really well. Detroit looks very beatable right now. Just Seattle. He's got two Seahawks playing at home Monday night against the Eagles. That's a big game for both. Probably must win for both. That's tough. We don't know what'll happen. I do think DK will have a good game, but still, there's potential that Boston could be very dominant in the consolation. There's also that potential that it just doesn't come together. And I agree with you. Love is a big X factor because if he plays well, that makes a huge difference. And if he doesn't, I think it's kind of a wet blanket of an end of the year for the team.
I mean, Bodzen's luck is that he is playing the team that has averaged under 80 points a week this week.
Right, right. Botson should get past Wagner, which at least Wagner won a game, I guess. We'll give him his, the kudos for that. He did look, he beat Drew. I mean, how many
Something.
weeks did Wagner score the fewest point? Was he the lowest scoring team? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 6 times he was the lowest scoring team out of 14 weeks. All right. In those, he never broke more than 65 points in any of those lowest scoring games.
He only broke
Yeah.
100 twice all season.
He
He
broke
scored,
100 twice. Yep.
he scored in the 60s more than he broke 100.
Yeah. He scored in the 50s as many times as he scored 100. I mean, it's unfathomable how bad it was. And at the same time, you know what? Look, he'll have the number 2 pick. I think that's the result, right? He's definitely not going to win the consolation, although it would be hilarious if the worst team once won the consolation, because that would essentially mean it was meaningless. But it's been rough. Like I said, we're trying to locate him. He's sort of a
Also,
Carmen in San Diego.
I would also like to point out that it is just my luck. I did beat him, but the week I played him is the week he scored the most points of the season for himself.
Yeah, I mean, he 110. You put up 135. That's fantastic. Uh, fantastic matchup really for Wagner. Of course, that week you did not score the most points in the league that week. So unfortunately, you don't have that to put that feather in your cap. It's been, you know, it's been a rough year for Wagner. It definitely makes you consider talk about new GM. That team could use a whole new front office. I think it might be time. Might be time to to do
That's
that.
interesting.
So anyway, we'll we'll see how it all shakes out. See if you're right on both fronts. Best of luck, of course, when it is your time. Maybe
Hopefully, I'll
you'll
be
get.
back for Championship Week Media Day.
Yes, yeah, we'll do Championship Week Media Day here. That'll be, man, right around the new year. No, I guess right after. That'll be, we'll do Media Day there. Hopefully it'll be you. We'll have Justin, and we'll see how it all plays out. So I appreciate it, sir.